Mr. Anderson was trying to write a book about the history of Denmark. A strange and terrifying phenomenon occurred with him, for which he could find no explanation. The events of this story take place in 1891, when Mr. Anderson decided to write a book about the history of Denmark, and he actually began traveling to Danish cities one after another in order to collect information and data about each city in order to include it in his book. During his writing trip, Mr. Anderson decided to travel to the Danish city of Viborg. The city of Viborg was an old city with few buildings. The reason for this was a large fire that destroyed most parts of the city. This fire occurred in the year 1726, and although many years have passed since this fire, that city is still frightening for many people, especially since the fire caused the death of many people, which created a somewhat terrifying situation for everyone. Mr. Anderson arrived in Viborg and decided to stay at the Golden Lion Hotel. The Golden Lion Hotel was one of the oldest buildings in Viborg. It was built more than 350 years ago and was one of the most famous hotels chosen by travelers to Viborg. That is why Mr. Anderson went directly there and decided to request a large room to stay in. This is so that he can feel comfortable, especially since he would be writing in that room, and therefore he thought he should stay in a special room. Indeed, he told the receptionist about his desire to book a large room, and the employee told him that he was lucky because the hotel was full of guests and there was only one room left, and fortunately for him, that room was one of the best and largest rooms in the hotel. It overlooks the main street directly and has 3 large windows, so air and sunlight constantly enter it. Mr. Anderson went to his room with a room service attendant to help him drop off his bag. It was a small bag. It contained simple pieces of pajamas, writing utensils, and some of his personal items. Mr. Anderson always preferred his bag to be small and contain only the essentials so that he could move around easily and without causing any difficulty. His constant travels and movement from place to place always taught him not to put anything valuable in his bag so that it would not be stolen. This was one of the harsh lessons that Mr. Anderson learned after one of the gold medals that he had inherited from his father, and which he loved to keep everywhere he went, was stolen from his bag. Unfortunately, one time he was in one of the Danish cities that is known for being somewhat poor, and he left his bag with the medal inside it and went to collect the information he wanted as usual. He returned to his room to find that the bag had been emptied on the bed and valuables had been taken from it. Mr. Anderson did not then care about any of the things that were taken from the bag. He only cared about the medal, which he felt very sad about losing. Unfortunately, when he went to complain to the hotel management, they told him that he had probably left the room door open, and that was why he was robbed, and Mr. Anderson was unable to retrieve the medal again. That's why he learned his lesson and no longer carried anything valuable in the bag on any of his trips. The room was neat and clean, which pleased Mr. Anderson very much, and it actually had 3 large windows, all looking out onto the great broad street in front of the hotel. The hotel was in the city center and surrounded by trees. As for the buildings opposite the hotel, there were not many. As we said before, many buildings and lives were lost in the fire that the city was exposed to. Mr. Anderson noticed that the receptionist took out the keys to the rooms so that she could give him the key to the room he was going to stay in, which was room No. 12. When he looked at the keyboard, he noticed that the keyboard contained the key to room No. 12, followed by the key to room No. 14, and here he did not look into the matter much, especially since he was tired and wanted to go up to his room to rest a little before dinner time. Mr. Anderson asked the housekeeper to place the bag on the table next to the window. After the room service attendant left, Mr. Anderson was in bed trying to sleep. Only minutes passed, and Mr. Anderson fell into a deep sleep. Shortly before dinner time, he woke up to find that night had fallen, so he quickly went downstairs to eat dinner, especially since he was feeling hungry because he had not eaten anything since the morning. The dinner was delicious. The atmosphere in the hotel was pleasant, and all the staff were very helpful, especially when Mr. Anderson tells them why he is visiting the city and the book he wants to write. Mr. Anderson finished his dinner and returned to go up to his room. On the way there, he noticed the hotel's signboard, which marked the empty rooms from the occupied ones. The hotel rooms were already all occupied. But at that moment, he noticed that there was something wrong with the arrangement of the rooms. He looked again and found that there was no room, No. 13. Yes, his room was No. 12, and immediately after it was room No. 14. Anderson felt curious and stopped to ask the receptionist, "What about room No. 13? Why?" The receptionist didn't understand what he meant at first and said to him, "What about it?" Mr. Anderson explained to her, "The numbers of all the rooms are on the sign behind you, except for room 13. Where is it?" The receptionist said to him while smiling, "Well, sir, 13 is an unlucky number. Many people do not want to stay in a room with a number that brings bad luck. Of course, you also do not want to stay in a room with an unlucky number." Anderson listened to her carefully, but he wasn't convinced by what she just said, and that's why he thanked her for her answer and went up to his room thinking about room number 13. Anderson arrived at the first floor, where his room was located, and here he stood in front of the door and tried to use the key he had. He tried the key more than once, but was unable to open the door. When he looked at the right side of the door, he knew the cause of the problem. Anderson made a mistake and is now standing in front of room No 13, not his room, No 12. Anderson heard someone moving inside the room, so he said loudly, "I'm so sorry." Then he moved towards the door of his room, number 12, but he was still thinking about room number 13. The receptionist said that number 13 was an unlucky number and that no one was staying in the room, and no one wanted to stay in room number 13. Who was the person who heard him moving inside the room? An idea came to his head. Perhaps the person staying in room 13 was one of the hotel workers. Then he decided to ask the hotel owner about the matter when he sees him tomorrow. Mr. Anderson lit the oil lamp in the room and felt that there was something strange. He looked around the room and felt that the room seemed smaller. This could not be true. The room was so big in the morning. How could it get smaller at night? Mr. Anderson thought that perhaps he was feeling tired. He is tired and does not judge things correctly. Perhaps he should sleep now, and in the morning he will be better. Indeed, Mr. Anderson changed his clothes and lay down on his bed to sleep. Despite feeling tired and exhausted, Mr. Anderson woke up several times that night, and finally, morning came. Mr. Anderson went downstairs to have breakfast and wanted to meet the hotel owner to ask him about the person staying in room 13. But he learned from one of the hotel workers that the hotel owner had gone to buy some supplies for the hotel and would return in the evening. After breakfast, Mr. Anderson headed to the city hall. He wanted to see the city records. As soon as he told the workers there about himself and the book he wanted to write, everyone was more than willing to help him, and they actually brought him the records they had, the oldest of which were from the 16th century. Here Anderson began to look at the paper with interest and found a group of letters written by the bishop of the city of Viborg. This was in the year 1560, and the bishop of the city had 3 or 4 houses in it, and he rented them out and obtained a good income from them. One day he rented one of his houses to a person named Nikolai Franken. Nicholas was an introverted man and did not have any relationships in the city, but this is not the only strange thing about Nicholas. The letters that Anderson reads made it clear that there were many people from the city of Viborg who did not like Nicholas. Rather, they wrote to the bishop telling him that Nicholas was a bad man, and some accused him with magic. And at that time, magic was one of the major crimes punishable by law, and some demanded that the bishop expel Nicholas from his home so that he could leave the entire city. But the bishop believed that everything people wrote about Nicholas was an exaggeration, that Nicholas had not done anything wrong, and if he expelled him, it would be for no reason, especially since the bishop did not believe that Nicholas was a magician. Anderson continued reading until one of the employees at the city hall came to him and told him that closing time had come, and that he could return the next day to complete the reading. The employee at the city hall promised him that he would leave everything behind, as it was, in order for Anderson to complete what he started tomorrow. Anderson thanked him very much for his help, and then the employee, who was working as a city clerk, asked him, saying, "I see that you are reading about the bishop and Nicholas Franken." Anderson said to him, "Yes, I am interested in knowing what happened with them, but I do not find anything that can tell me where Franken lived." To which the city clerk replied sadly, "Unfortunately, many of the city's records were burned in the Great Fire of 1726. Anderson thanked him again and went straight to the Golden Lion Hotel. When he returned, he found the hotel owner present, but he was busy talking to more than one person, so Anderson was unable to speak to him again. He went directly to his room on the first floor, and this time he went to room number 13 and stopped in front of its door. He was then certain that there was someone staying. Inside, he now heard the voice of a person speaking and moving in the room. This person inside was speaking in a loud voice, but Anderson could not understand what he was saying. The words were strange, as if they were in another language. Anderson went to his room, number 12, and entered there. The room seemed smaller indeed, as he had felt last night, and then he thought about going downstairs and asking to change his room to another, larger room, as he had wanted when he arrived at the hotel, but he decided to wait a little while and write down some things. Then he would go down to the hotel owner to ask him to change the room. When he went to the bag to take his writing utensils, he did not find them. Well, he did not find the bag or the table on which the bag was placed. The table was next to the window. Where did it go? It had completely disappeared from the room. Could it be that someone had moved his things out of the room without his knowledge? He felt nervous, so he decided to light a cigarette. It was getting dark, so Anderson went to the last window in his room. That window was the closest to room 13. He put the extinguisher on window and stand looking at the houses outside. There was a long house across the street, and Anderson had already turned on his room lamp and placed it behind him, so its shadow was cast on the building on the other side of the street. Anderson could see his shadow clearly, and then he noticed that there was the shadow of another person, but it was from the next room, room number 13. This person who was staying in was also standing in front of the window, and it seemed from the shadow that he was wearing a long pointed hat. Although this was strange, the most important thing was what caught Anderson's attention was the color of the light that appeared from the room. It was red color similar to blood. Anderson was curious and decided to try to see this person in the next room. He actually stuck his head out the window in an attempt to look at the window of room 13. Here, he only saw a sleeve of a white coat. He could not see anything else, especially since this person in room 13 moved away from the window and out of the spotlight. Anderson quickly finished his cigarette and suddenly felt sleepy, so he left the ashtray as it was on the windowsill and went to bed after turning off the lamp. Anderson slept without a problem this night, and in the morning he woke up to a knock on the room door. One of the maids was bringing Anderson hot water. As soon as she entered, Anderson asked her, "Where is my bag, please?" The maid looked at him in astonishment and then started laughing as she pointed to the window. Anderson did not understand why she was laughing, but he looked at the place she was pointing to and found the table that had disappeared yesterday with his bag on it exactly as it was. And that was not the only strange thing that Anderson noticed. The ashtray that he left yesterday on the last window in the room next to room number 13 was now on the edge of the middle window, not the last. Anderson was certain and clearly remembered that he was smoking his cigarette at the last window next to room number 13. Anderson got up from his place, put on his clothes, and decided to finish his mission, but the state of curiosity got the better of him. Well, he decided to go see the person in the next room. Anderson left his room towards room 13, but he was surprised that the room was not there. The room next to his was room 14. Anderson felt so terrified and incomprehensible that he doubted it. "I'm going crazy." He went downstairs to have breakfast and then went to the city hall. Indeed, he found everything as he had left it yesterday. He began examining many old papers and was trying to find any of the letters that the bishop had written about Nicholas, but he found only one other letter from the bishop, and the letter was strange. It is incomprehensible, in which the bishop says that a large group of the city's people agreed to go to Nicholas's house and persuade him to leave Viborg, but when they arrived at the house they did not find Nicholas. He had completely disappeared, and since this day no one knows where Nicholas went, and no one has ever seen him. It was strange for Anderson, who began to feel that this entire city was making him anxious and uncomfortable. How could someone suddenly disappear in this way without any introduction, or even without returning? Anderson did not find any answers to his question and did not want to distract his focus. He had a task that he must finish. Anderson went forward to thank the city clerk for his help and told him that he would spend 2 days in the city to inspect it and then go to the next city. The city clerk wished him luck in completing his task and told him he will buy his book as soon as it comes out. Anderson then headed to the Golden Lion Hotel, and then he found the hotel owner in front of him, so he thought that this was a good opportunity to ask him about room number 13. After they both greeted, Anderson began to ask the hotel owner, "Why is there no room number 13? The owner said to him, as if he did not want to continue the conversation, "Many people will not sleep in room number 13. Anderson asked him, "Why?" The hotel owner replied, "They say this number is unlucky." And here Anderson asked him again, "So who is the person staying in room number 13? The owner was amazed at what Anderson said and said to him, "There is no room number 13. The room next to you is room number 14. Anderson shook his head in denial, saying, "Of course there is not. I must have read the wrong number." Here Anderson thought that the owner might be denying the existence of that room for some reason in his head, and that he had to change his method if he wanted to know more about that room that everyone denies exists, even though he has confirmed its existence more than once. That's why he said to the hotel owner, "It's okay. How about you come to my room and have a glass of brandy and a cigar?" The owner was pleased with Anderson's offer, and immediately went with him to his room after telling him, "I would like that very much." Indeed, Anderson and the hotel owner went up to the first floor, towards room No. 12, Anderson's room, and here they passed room No. 10 and room No. 11, and finally arrived at room No. 12. As soon as they entered the room, the owner immediately noticed that the room seemed small, so he said to Anderson, "This room seems very small." Anderson nodded without commenting on what the hotel owner was saying. He went to the bag and took out a bottle of brandy and poured 2 glasses for himself and the hotel owner. Then he lit the cigar and went to open the window to let the smoke out of the room. Here, Anderson noticed the red light in room 13 was on. He saw the shadow he had seen before on the building in front of the hotel, but this time, the shadow was dancing violently as if in the middle of a battle, but at the same time there was no noise. Anderson thought about telling the hotel owner about all the strange things that had happened since his arrival and went to sit in the chair opposite him. When he decided to speak, he was interrupted by a noise, a loud noise coming from the next room. The noise was sudden and terrifying at the same time, and it was incomprehensible to Anderson, who looked at the hotel owner and asked him, "Is that a cat? Or is there a crazy man in the next room?" The hotel owner looked at him in amazement, saying, "It is Mr. Jensen. He is often in his room. He's quiet all the time and does not make any sounds. He is an old and sick man, and this noise cannot be coming from his room." Then they both heard a strong knocking sound. At the door of Anderson's room, Anderson quickly went to open the door and found in front of him a man he did not know. The hotel owner looked at him with a look of shock on his face. The man standing in front of the door spoke to Mr. Anderson and to the hotel owner, saying, "Please stop this terrible noise. It has become improbable." The hotel owner responded in shock, as if confirming the information to himself. "Mr. Jensen, we thought you were the one making this noise." The 3 men looked at each other at that moment and quickly left the room. They stood in the corridor and began searching for the source of the sound. It was room 13. It was the source of the sound. And then the hotel owner approached the door that appeared out of nowhere and turned the door handle. The door was locked from the inside, and the hotel owner said to them while shouting, "I will bring men to break down this door." Then he ran towards the stairs while Mr. Jensen and Mr. Anderson stood in front of the door of room number 13. As they listened to the terrible noise, it became louder and more brutal, and here Mr. Jensen said to Mr. Anderson, "I want to tell you something strange. My room has 3 windows during the day and only 2 at night. Well, I know you might think I'm crazy, but I swear." Here Mr. Anderson interrupted him, saying, "Oh my God, the same thing happens in my room. I notice that the room at night is smaller than the room during the day." Here, Mr. Jensen and Mr. Anderson noticed that the door to room No. 13 suddenly opened and an arm emerged from it. It was a long arm covered in gray hair that looked like a mouse's hair. The fingernails were long and very dirty. They looked terrifying and disgusting at the same time. Both Anderson and Jensen screamed. Anderson froze. In his place, Mr. Jensen moved and pulled Anderson away from the room, and as soon as they both moved away, the arm entered the room again and the door was closed, and then they both heard the sound of crazy, evil laughter coming from inside the room. The owner of the hotel at that time went up with 2 men to break down the door, but they didn't find the door when they went up. It was frightening for everyone, and then Anderson decided to collect all his belongings and leave the hotel immediately. Mr. Jensen and the hotel owner tried to persuade him to stay until the morning, but he did not accept. He packed his bag and headed to the train station. He stayed up all night at the station until the morning train came and carried him to the next city. From that day on, Mr. Anderson never returned to Viborg and was keen to write down his experience there in his book.